Testament passage today. I'm going to stand away from the other mic, maybe we won't squeak so much. Our New Testament passage today is Matthew 25, starting verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food? Or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of these, the least who are members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for you, for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do to one of these, you did not do it for me." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
That's a hard text, isn't it? I was studying through this and I came across this story, and I'm sad to admit that it came out of Texas. Now, I will say that this must have happened after I was in school, because this did not affect my education. But the Texas education bureaucracy received and approved a new set of textbooks. So a group of concerned parents conducted their own review. The parents found 231 errors, including the following: Napoleon winning at the Battle of Waterloo, President Truman dropping the atom bomb on Korea, and General Douglas MacArthur leading the anti-communist campaign in the 1950s. It was Senator Joe McCarthy. When called to account for these errors, the bureaucrats studied the texts again, and they found more errors. Then the parents found some more. The tally now stands at 5,200 mistakes. So how did the publishers react to this? Well, one of the publishers' spokesperson argued that except for the errors, everyone agrees these are the finest textbooks they've ever seen. Except for the errors. Except for the errors, that teenage girl wouldn't be pregnant and getting an abortion now. Except for the error, that man's wife wouldn't be leaving him because he had an affair. Except for the error, the brakes on the school bus would have worked. Except for the errors. Except for his drinking problem, he's a pretty good guy. Except for her drug problem, she's a good mom. Except for his sticky fingers, he was a good banker. Except for her gossiping, she's a really good friend. Who are we except for. We make these excuses. They sound silly when we apply them to someone else, but we make them for ourselves. And when we do that, when we except for, we become very, very lost. And this is one of those passages that reminds me of that. Except for those sins of omission, I'm pretty okay. I'll do all right at Judgment Day, right? Except for, in this teaching on judgment, it would be really easy to interpret the lesson as one of works righteousness. You do these things and you're fine. After all, it says the Son of Man comes and judges people by what they do or don't do. But it's a little more nuanced than that if you really pay close attention. First of all, Jesus says to the sheep, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you." Inherit. Inheritance isn't earned. An inheritance is a gift. And what's most striking is that the righteous are not aware of what they have done. Lord, when did we see you in need and help you? They've not been acting in a way that checks off the rules, in a way that makes them think they're going to earn God's favor. Lord, when did we see you hungry? Their actions are a sign of their relationship with God. They're a sign that they have connected with the one who came to serve, not to be served. And in the final judgment, those who are at the right hand of the Son of Man are called the righteous ones, not because they have better knowledge of the Scriptures or some exceptional spiritual gifts. No. They're called righteous because they identify with the righteous one. Do you believe in God? Belief has come to mean kind of cognitive assent, agreement with. But belief originally meant, is your heart bound up with this thing? Is your heart bound up with God? And we still use it that way. I believe in you, Linda, you can be a liturgist. I believe in you, you can do it. I believe in you, you can win that ball game. I believe in you, you can do this. So we still use it that way, but less often when we're talking about God and when we're talking about God's people. I believe in you, you can be sheep. So the sheep acted not out of just obedience, not out of just head, but they acted because their hearts were bound up with Jesus' heart. Jesus' words, "What have you done for these, my family?" show us that Jesus identifies with the world's outcasts. And those who fed and clothed and visited and comforted were simply acting out of their identity with Christ. They weren't remembering rules. Now for those at the left hand, for the goats, the situation is rather dire. In ignoring the needs of the least of these, they have rejected the Son of Man. By ignoring the needs of the least, we reject the Son of Man. That's pretty heavy. I want you to notice that the ones that Jesus condemns did not impose that suffering. He didn't say, "You beat me and left me there for dead." He didn't say, "You stole my food and left me hungry." He didn't say you stole my clothes, no. The ones that Jesus condemns did not impose the suffering circumstances, but neither did they respond to them. In Basel, Switzerland, stands a sculpture on the front of the wall of a church depicting Martin of Tours, a Roman soldier converted to Christianity. The inspiration for this sculpture originated from a story of Martin's action on a bitterly cold day. Martin was entering a city and was approached by a beggar pleading for alms. Having no money, Martin removed his coat, cut it in two, and gave half to the beggar. That night, he had a vision that he had died and gone to heaven. And there he saw Jesus. And on the back of Christ was half of a Roman soldier's coat. And an angel asked the King of heaven and earth, "Master, why are you wearing this battered old coat?" And Jesus answered, "Because my servant Martin gave it to me." This is the 5th week of Lent. Next week is Palm Sunday, and then Holy Week. And this story is placed in the narrative right before the triumphal entry and the passion and the resurrection. This story of sheep and goats comes right before Jesus' betrayal and arrest and torture and execution. As Robert H. Smith clarifies, the Son of God stands deliberately in the shoes of the powerless, the weak, the defenseless, the hated, and the tortured. Jesus began as a refugee, and he ends as a condemned criminal. Jesus began as a refugee and ended his earthly life as a condemned criminal. Who do you think he's going to stand with? Do you think he's going to stand with the powerful of this world? Do you think he's going to support the status quo as long as injustice prevails? In my first youth ministry classes about 25 years ago, we were talking about mission trips, about planning mission trips, and what is the purpose of a mission trip. And the purpose, while yes, it is to meet the needs of others, those needs might be better met by just sending all of our money or sending skilled craftsmen down to build houses or repair roofs or whatever. But one of the purposes of gathering a group of Jesus followers to go do hands-on mission, especially youth, is to show our youth what it means to pray the classic prayer, "Oh Lord, break my heart for what breaks yours." Let what breaks your heart, God, let that break my heart. Let me not be blind to it. I still have to pray that. And I'm sad to say sometimes it's not as effective as I would want it to be. Well, always it's not as effective as I would want it to be. Now, maybe you won't identify with everything I'm about to say, but maybe you struggle with that too. I have a hard time allowing my heart to break. I know that is kind of hard, I'm sure, for Dave to relate to because, you know, he makes fun of me for crying at the silliest little movies. I mean, remember those old Kodak commercials, a Kodak moment? I could get teary and misty-eyed with those. So it's not like I don't have any feelings. I have feelings, and they're sometimes right up there at the surface. But sometimes the pain of the strangers in this life just doesn't have that effect on me. I'm not It isn't because I haven't been exposed to poverty or to heartache or to injustice. It's not because I'm not aware of things going on in the world around me. I don't think it's because I'm a selfish person, but I have trouble with it. Lord, break my heart for what breaks yours. I think I have a hard time identifying with the vulnerable and the hurting in our world because I just don't take the time. And I'm not willing to be vulnerable to allow my heart to be broken. Perhaps like mine, the wounds of your soul are still raw. Perhaps you still carry hurt that has not yet been resolved. Perhaps you have hurt hidden deeply, locked away. Perhaps you have hurt that's been healed. But sometimes in the process of healing, our hearts can become hardened. Sometimes we say, I just don't want my heart to hurt anymore. Sometimes it's just easier to keep my heart covered up and locked away. But you know, a hardened heart is not a heart for God. Oh Lord, break my heart for what breaks yours. I tried desperately to open my heart, but I am afraid. And how do I really allow my heart to break? I'm not sure how you will let your heart break. But I do know that we all have to go through a process to let that happen. Consider this as a process. Step 1, sit down long enough to cry. To cry. Now, I thrive on being busy, and, I think a lot of us fall into that. We want to be productive. But sometimes we need to take the time to allow ourselves to be broken by what breaks God's heart. Allow ourselves to cry. Even Jesus sat down and wept. Step 2, or maybe a second goal. I don't think these would be consecutive steps. So allow yourself to cry and be willing to be miserable. There's a catchy one for you, right? Be willing to be miserable. We don't want to be miserable. We want to be happy all the time. But if we can't be willing to be miserable, we cannot understand what it's like to have a heart broken for God. This means we have to allow ourselves to be around people who are not happy all the time. Because life is not happy all the time. If we're being honest, we might, I'm not speaking for you, for me. If I'm being honest, I have to admit that that's not always easy. To allow myself to be miserable with someone else. And to have my heart broken for God means that I need to know what it is that breaks God's heart. It's really not hard to know. Just a cursory look at Scripture, at those things that Jesus pays attention to, will show us what it is that breaks God's heart. Human suffering, human loneliness, hunger, thirst, nakedness. Those are the things that break God's heart. I want you to take out your bulletins, and there is, in each bulletin, there is a picture. They're not all the same. makes me tear up fastest. Take a look at it. Take a look. Take a look at the picture in your bulletin. Lord, when did we see you in need? When did we see you hungry, in prison, a stranger? This is what breaks God's heart. Now keep that picture in your mind and imagine what it's like to sit next to that person. Enter into that misery. Close your eyes if you will, and picture yourself in that photograph. Lord, when did we see you in need? This is what breaks God's heart. And I want you to know that even though they've been kind of photoshopped, every one of these is a photograph, not a painting, a photograph of reality. When that sinks in, that this is a child of God, this is the reality in which one of your brothers or sisters is living. Can you cry when that reality sinks in? When you can cry at that reality, say again that question. Lord, when did we see you in need? When did we meet your need? This is what breaks God's heart. Not only the need, but the callousness of ones who can meet it. Do you believe in God? It's hard. It's hard to believe in the way that we just talked about. It's hard to have your heart bound up. It's hard to have your heart broken by that which breaks God's heart. But just know, the sheep on God's right hand are not following rules. They're not adhering to schedules. They're acting out of their identity. They're acting because they identify with the one who came as a refugee. They identify with the one who wept with humanity. They identify with the one who gave himself up for you and for me and for these. So Lord, when did we see you hungry and give you food? When did we see you thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you in? When was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? Truly, I tell you, just as you did for one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it for me. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.